We will do it. Okay, so welcome to the last one of the series in Food and Mood. We're going to be talking about sleep and the circadian rhythm. Well, actually, there's more than one, but we're going to focus mostly on the sleep wake cycle. And so hopefully there will be time to have plenty of question and answer time at the end, and maybe even try out a technique as well. So I'll go ahead and share my screen so we can get started here. Okay, so hopefully everyone can now see my screen. The title slide, food, mood, what's the connection? We're going to talk about the circadian rhythm. Like I just mentioned, for those of you who are just coming in to the Zoom session from the waiting room, I think most of you probably know me by now, but if anyone is in here where we haven't met yet, my name is Amber Reed, and I am a qualified mental health professional, a national board certified health and wellness coach, and a certified nutrition and wellness educator. I am the owner of Balanced Energies, which is my own health coaching private practice here in Greensboro. And I'm also a trainer for heart math and QPR and a whole lot of other things that we don't have time to go into today. But suffice it to say, my passion really is talking about health and wellness and sort of the idea behind this series, the link between food and mood. Okay, so again, this is the last session and we're going to jump right in. Looking at sleep and circadian rhythm, a lot of times we think about these two together, and that's because they really are intricately tied together. Sleep is a necessity for actually maintaining that physical, mental, spiritual, and even emotional health. And sleep is when our bodies repair and restore themselves. A lot of times we think about the circadian rhythm in terms of sleeping, right? But the sleep-wake cycle is really only one of the body's circadian rhythms. And like I mentioned previously, that is the one we will be focusing more on today, is that sleep-wake cycle. But the circadian rhythm is really just that natural 24-hour cycle that helps to regulate our body systems. We think about this sleep-wake cycle being the most predominant one, but that's really based on the light and dark cycle of the rotation of the earth and that 24-hour period. So many of you may work odd hours or have job requirements that require you to work late into the evening just to get everything done. A lot of people have so many demands today that they push their working day much later. And this can actually impact the natural flow of the circadian rhythm. So we're going to talk about kind of how to balance that circadian rhythm today, what some key strategies might be to do that, but also hopefully link it back into some of the other things that we've talked about in this series. How it impacts appetite and food cravings, how it impacts and is affected by our level of stress, right? And even the level of inflammation. Because sleep can only really occur when we feel safe enough to go to sleep. If we are constantly stressed and we're constantly hypervigilant, sleep can be a very, very elusive thing. So just kind of thinking about how all this starts to work together. And if you have any questions, again, jot those down. We're going to have a Q&A at the end where you can get some of those questions answered. So I'd like to start by asking you, and Steph, if you could just watch the chat for me, but how many of you have been impacted by sleep challenges or maybe those work demands or changes in routine that have maybe impacted your sleep? Does anyone want to share or comment about that? So I see there's some things with insomnia, not being able to sleep very well, um, to either get to sleep or stay asleep. That can be a huge problem for a lot of people. So if we look at the Sleep in America poll that was done in 2020, there's actually between 10 and 30% of adults who struggle with insomnia. And I mean, that's a pretty high percentage. That could be upwards to near a third of the population suffering, struggling with insomnia. And about 35% of all adults in the US actually report sleeping less than the 7 hours per night that experts agree is kind of the minimum, right? They want to see between 7 and 8 hours typically. And Americans, I think, is somewhere between 6 and 6.5 hours is about what the average American gets per night. So well below that 7 hours per sleep anyway. Additionally, about half of all Americans say they feel sleepy during the day. And this happens anywhere between 3 to every day of the week, 3 days to 7 times a week. They will report that this is happening. And this is impacted, women are impacted typically more than men, and they tend to report poorer sleep quality as well as more disrupted sleep across the various life stages. And we do know that hormones help to play a role sort of in these sleep wake cycles as well. And so that could be part of the reason for women as well. But about 89% of adults and 75% of kids have at least one electronic device in their bedroom. We'll talk about today how that can really impact our quality of sleep. So, and maybe some ways that we can work around that. Now, researchers are still unsure of what purpose a lot of these sleep stages that you see on the screen serve. They do know that, they've gone back and forth. I remember when I first started looking at this, there were 5 stages of sleep. And then several years ago, they moved it back down to 4 stages of sleep. But the idea is that you have non-REM and REM stages. And the stages 1 through 3 are really qualified, they qualify as that non-REM sleep. Whereas stage 4 is where you get that REM, that rapid eye movement sleep. And that's typically where we see dreaming. But stage 3 is typically where we get that more restorative type of sleep, where our body rests, restores, repairs, regenerates itself. And we get that really, really deep sleep during that stage. And the thing is that the several of those stages, as you age, as you have circadian rhythm disruptions, even with certain diseases, they can be easily disrupted and can impact that sleep quality. Now, if your sleep quality is good and you're running through the stages as an average person does, you're going to hit 3 to 5 of these cycles a night. And so a cycle is made up of all the stages. So it goes 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then it starts back over and it'll go back to 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so it cycles. And so the average person, you're going to see about 3 to 5 completed cycles per night. So just to kind of give you an idea of the basis behind those sleep stages and different things. We do know that sleep deprivation impacts our health. And it's not just one aspect of health, but it is literally whole health, right? It's the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual. It's going to impact, your ability to be social, your professional health, maybe even financial health, depending on what you're able to do, how drained you are of energy, right? So it can really impact all of those dimensions of wellness. And so again, like what I was saying, the average American gets between 6 and 6.5 hours of sleep per night, but a recommended of 7 hours is what is probably most beneficial. 8 hours would be ideal, right? But then of course, too, you have to keep in mind that there are individual variances, right? So, those are average numbers. You may be able to operate on 6 or 7 and feel fine without any adverse effects, whereas someone else may need 8 or 9 hours to actually feel rested. So sleep deprivation, or really that lack of quality sleep, can be called sleep deficiency or sleep insufficiency. You may have heard it that way, but it can have numerous effects on the body. It can actually drive systemic low-grade inflammation. Okay, because we just finished up talking about inflammation. Inflammation can cause sleep disruption, and sleep disruption can cause inflammation. It can increase clumsiness and forgetfulness, right? How many times have you forgotten something when you weren't feeling awake and alert? It can decrease productivity. It can impact emotional regulation, your ability to think and make decisions. Okay, so lots of different impacts that lack of sleep can have. And what they found is that increasing sleep by just 1 hour per night was associated with eating 150 fewer calories the next day. So it is kind of food and mood. So I thought I would throw that one in there. But you can just see how sleeping 1 hour more can impact eating in such a drastic way. We've also found that just one night of sleep deprivation can increase inflammatory markers in the body, just as one night of shift work can impair cognitive functioning for up to a week afterwards. Okay, so we know through research that there are lots of drastic effects that just missing sleep for one night can have. Okay, so think about this. Have you ever been more easily agitated or irritable, maybe even slightly aggressive or hostile after not getting enough sleep? Or maybe just everything seemed to be more stressful the days following when you didn't get a good night's sleep. Anyone ever had that? I know when I don't get enough sleep, my poor children, they pay for it the next day, because everything just seems to get under my skin. And that's actually really common, really, really common. Because I'll give you, for example, in 2011, they did a research study, and it showed that positive emotions decrease while negative emotions increase in response to sleep deprivation. This was especially pronounced for adolescents. And it also impacts our ability to think rationally, pursue goals, make decisions, all of those thinking capacities. They've actually found that being sleep deprived is equivalent to being legally under the influence, like impaired by alcohol. It has the same effects on the body by slowing your reaction time, impairing your judgment, impairing your thinking. So, I sit there and I'm like, how many of us are really driving around trying to work on lack of sleep? And it's the same as if we showed up to work drunk or we're driving drunk, right? So lack of sleep has also been shown to put the nervous system on alert. So we are going to be more emotionally responsible, hence why many of us are more agitated. We also tend to see things as more threatening when we are sleep deprived. So something that we might not really notice when we have enough sleep becomes a big danger to our nervous system, right? For us, it could just be traffic, but that traffic is perceived as being much more dangerous when we are sleep deprived than when we are well rested. So these findings are really more pronounced when we attempt to self-medicate with caffeine and stimulants. Okay, we'll discuss that in a little bit in more detail, but caffeine can also increase that nervous system's response to stress as well. So if you take a look at the graphic there, you can actually see some of those dangerous side effects. So I'm not going to hit on all of them, but I do just want you to kind of think about some of those, where it says leads to early death. That's actually related to the idea that there are more accidents when you are sleep deprived. And this could be, anything from tripping and falling to having a motor vehicle crash, as I mentioned, since it does impair you in the same way as alcohol. It impairs our memory and impairs our learning ability. So think about, how many students you see across campus, and maybe they are sleep deprived, how that might impair their learning for the day. It impacts our mental health. Sleep deprivation is actually a leading cause or a leading risk factor for suicide. And it does impact many other mental health conditions, including anxiety and depression. The statistics suggest that about 90% of people with depression actually have some kind of sleep disturbance present. Now that particular statistic did not go into how it was disrupted. Some people with depression sleep more, some sleep less, some go to sleep but then wake up. So there's a lot of different ways, but up to 90% of people with depression have sleep impacted in some way. And part of this is believed to occur because of sleep deprivation impacting neurotransmitter balance and function. This is especially with regard to serotonin, dopamine, GABA. We're going to talk about those here in a minute in more detail as well. But it also impacts our hormones, okay? And so we'll look at that. So it impacts hormones, help to regulate metabolism, appetite, our stress responses, right? So all of these things can come into play. And I hope you're starting to get an idea of, oh, we've talked about the gut, we've talked about appetite, we've talked about stress and inflammation. And all of these either impact our ability to sleep and impact our circadian rhythm, or are possibly even controlled by that circadian rhythm. And so it all works together. Our body is a complete whole. It doesn't work in parts. Even though our doctors divide into specialties, it really doesn't work in parts like that. So just thinking about some of these health benefits, not health benefits, we're going to get to health benefits, some of these health side effects that can occur. I am working towards benefits. I will get there. But I did want to get you to think about how sleepy are you? Now, I will send out a circadian balance assessment after the presentation. I'm not going to take the time to go through it now, but it will give you a way just to kind of assess if you may have some circadian imbalances going on. Okay, so I will send that out. But just take a look at the ones that are listed here for how sleepy are you. And I will just give you a moment. And if you want to share or comment anything in the chat, feel free. You'd like to count off, if you want to do it that way. But the idea is that the more you check off, the greater your chances of having sleep difficulties. There's also an instrument called the PSQI, which is a validated sleep assessment instrument that you may find useful if anyone wants more of a validated type of assessment to assess sleep. Do any of you have any of those that you checked off? Is there one that seems to be more troublesome than the others? Okay, so it's not restful. Several of you have several of those, right? Yeah, it's not uncommon to see several of these things go together, right? So just sort of a way for you to start to think, do I have sleep issues? Is there something going on beneath the surface that I need to address? Now, here are some common causes of sleep disruption, okay? Alcohol, tobacco, caffeine. Those really may or may not be surprising to you. A lot of times people think, well, I drink alcohol because it relaxes me and then I can go to sleep. But the science really shows that alcohol may help you go to sleep, but it doesn't help you stay asleep or get restful sleep. Caffeine is the same sort of thing. We'll talk about caffeine here in just a moment and how excessive caffeine use actually offsets your baseline. But you have things like blue light. We'll talk about blue light, really more about bright light, but blue light is the main one within that. Hormones and neurotransmitter imbalances. I've already mentioned that as a common cause. Stress. Like I said, if your body is keyed up and you've got that high cortisol rushing through your body because you are constantly under a deadline, or you have, 15 responsibilities, or, maybe you live in a neighborhood that you don't feel is safe, whatever that stressful event happens to be, it can impact hormone levels, it can impact emotional balance, and all of these things we know can impact sleep, right? A lot of times with stress comes that racing mind. And so it's very hard to turn it off at night when you are trying to sleep. And so we'll go over a couple of strategies that may help with that if that seems to be more of what your problem with going to sleep is. Obviously, the circadian rhythm, which we're focusing on, but the timing of medications can play a role. Sometimes people forget to think about that. But if you take your multivitamin, let's say, for instance, it's full of B vitamins, and B vitamins produce energy. They help you feel energized. If you're taking that before bed, then it could impact your ability to sleep. And so the same is true for other types of medications. I know with certain psychiatric medications, talking to your pharmacist is actually advised, because certain ones can be energizing where you'd want to take them more in the morning, whereas others can be very sedating and you may want to take them more at night. Chronic pain, and there are many others. What other things do you think contribute to you not sleeping well? I did see in the comments earlier, somebody mentioned snoring. That's a great, you have a partner who snores, right? That can keep you up at night. But what else keeps you up? Animals, bathroom breaks, worry. Yes, worry and ruminating on those different things that come into our mind. Okay, and sometimes that can be very difficult to turn it off. Some hormonal issues. Yeah, with those hot flashes. Lots of different things in there. Okay. Other things that you may not have considered, but maybe you live in a noisy neighborhood. Someone did mention pets, and they can actually disturb sleep, especially if they're in the bed with you. But what about just lights? Has anyone ever thought about lights? The light on your alarm clock, the light coming through your window, the light from your cell phone if you sleep with your cell phone in there. A light is actually one of the main controllers of the circadian rhythm. And so some people are more sensitive to light than others, right? So some of you may be able to have a little bit of light and it not bother you, and others of you may need it completely dark. Room darkening shades, sleep mask. I have stuff laying over all my lamps, all my alarm clocks. I turn my cell phone off, but it's face down over my alarm clock. And so, because I'm one of those, I have to have it completely dark. Okay, so of course, if we're not getting enough sleep, what happens to our energy level, right? It's going to be tanked. And a lot of us will supplement with caffeine or stimulants of some sort to help us get over those little dips in energy, right? Or even if we're not waking up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the morning, we're using that caffeine. So I don't want you to take away the message that you can't ever have caffeine or ever have, anything that kind of lifts you in a stimulating way. What I want you to really take away here is that when they're used excessively all the time, every day, they can be problematic. That the timing of them really does matter, right? So taking them right before bed may impact sleep. Whereas if you have caffeine earlier in the morning, hopefully that's going to be more out of your system to help you so that you can go to sleep later. Okay. And they're really not a solution to long-term energy enhancement, right? There are other ways to build energy that will lead to sustained change instead of using caffeine. Because eventually what happens is that the body tries to adapt to the effects of the caffeine and requires higher and higher doses to get the same effect. Does that fit anyone? You used to have a cup of coffee and it would be enough to get you, and now you're up to 2, 4, 6 cups of coffee a day, and that's just to keep you going. And you may even be to the point where you can drink caffeine right before bed and it doesn't bother you because your body has adjusted so much. Okay. So this is actually what happens is our body begins to adjust, and eventually no dose of caffeine is going to suffice to provide that energy. And you're going to start to feel burned out, lethargic. You may notice that as soon as you drop off, you get that crash. After the caffeine wears off, you really get that crash. Okay. And the caffeine can cause the neurotransmitters to get imbalanced and cause adaptations in them as well. And what this leads to, you can see here that there's a normal performance and energy line sort of right here across on the side of that graph. Okay. So what happens if you consider that that's your average, your norm, right? The red line is the person on caffeine. And so if you have caffeine occasionally and you use caffeine, I'll say tactically, right? You choose the timing, you use it sporadically for specific purposes, then you're going to get that boost in energy, which is what it's meant to do. It actually blocks adenosine receptors. So caffeine blocks adenosine receptors. And adenosine is what helps make us sleepy. It's what, as we go through the day, adenosine builds up and it creates more and more of a sleep pressure. And this sleep pressure is then eventually, when it hits a certain level, it's like, okay, it's time to go to sleep. I can't handle any more of that sleep pressure. Caffeine comes in and it says, whoa, hold up, adenosine. And it goes in and it blocks those receptors so that you don't feel that sleep pressure, right? And so you can see here on the left side of the graph that that's what it does. It blocks that adenosine. You feel more energized, more alert, right? And it raises it above baseline. Well, on this right side, what happens is that this is with chronic consumption and excessive consumption of caffeine, is that the person on caffeine has to take more and more to get that boost, because over time, their norm is actually lower than when they started. And so if they drink just the normal amount that they were drinking over here, it only gets them up to the baseline that they had originally. So then they have to bump it up and bump it up to get, again, that peak in energy. I hope I explained that okay. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. So are there any questions about that? Did that make sense? So again, adenosine is one way to control how sleepy you feel, right? Or how sleepy you don't feel if you block those receptors. Another major way is though through this circadian rhythm. So this is where we really want to get in to talking about the circadian rhythm, and the factors that can impact their circadian rhythm include things like genetics. We all have some sort of genetic variability, right? And how we process things. There's even gene differences in how we process caffeine. Okay. But things like light exposure, that chronic stress, the timing of our eating and our exercise, and even temperature. We're going to talk about how all those factors actually impact circadian rhythm, and then how that goes on to impact our sleep patterns, that hormone and neurotransmitter balance, right? It does impact our appetite and digestion, impacts our mitochondria, which are our energy sources. You know, they take our food and convert it to energy for us. It lowers resilience and impacts the microbiome. So all things that we have hit on as we've gone through this series. The master clock, okay, so when we talk about the circadian rhythm and we're talking about the sleep-wake cycle, the master clock in the brain that coordinates all of the biological clocks is made up of a group of about 20,000 nerve cells. And it's, yeah, and so it's, and they form a structure called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. We're going to call it the SCN from here on out so that you know what I'm talking about. But it's the SCN is in the part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and it just receives direct input from the eyes. Okay, so this is the structure that is super light sensitive. So when we talk about light exposure, we're really talking about setting this master clock. When we talk about timing of eating and exercise, that's a slightly different part of the brain. Okay, but again, still helps regulate circadian rhythms. And that SCN controls the production of melatonin. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of you have heard of melatonin, but melatonin is what helps to kind of make us sleepy, right? We think about melatonin as being that sleep hormone. Okay, so we'll talk about this in more detail here in a little bit, but our body's ability to make melatonin can be impacted by several things, right? Light is one of them, disruption in circadian rhythm, but also melatonin is made from serotonin. So disruptions in the serotonin pathway from gut dysfunction or chronic stress, even inflammation, can divert serotonin away from melatonin production. So it puts it down a different path, which can actually lead to more inflammation and can lead to brain inflammation as well. So if we look at some of these hormones, just so that we're all on the same page, many of the hormones and neurotransmitters that are under circadian influence will actually increase and decrease as the day goes on, because they're cyclical. They're on that 24-hour cycle. So cortisol, for example, will be higher in the morning, but it should start to dwindle as the evening rolls around, because, you know, it's starting to prepare us for relaxing, getting that more restorative type of sleep. Okay, well, chronic stress keeps those cortisol levels elevated. And so you can start to see how stress can impact sleep. Cortisol is in opposition to sort of melatonin. So as cortisol dips, melatonin starts to increase, right? And so melatonin is what we need for sleep. And it's going to help us to sort of regulate this sleep-wake cycle. And that melatonin, like we just talked about, is often coordinated with, you know, the light exposure, but also rising and falling body temperatures. And research has even suggested that melatonin appears to slow metabolism So we'll talk about that hopefully a little bit more in a bit. But dopamine is that neurotransmitter that keeps us moving towards goals, right? It gives us that motivation to act. It impacts our metabolism, our energy use, that activity, right? But it's a huge player in our mental health. And it's actually impacted by circadian forces, including light, but also caffeine. Caffeine can increase dopamine, as can those high foods we talked about when we talked about appetite, high fat, high sugar. So if you are sleep deprived and you're needing a boost of dopamine to get you motivated, to get you moving, it's no wonder we crave carbs, or we crave sugar, or we crave fat, right? And serotonin kind of does the same things. Serotonin can be triggered by those same sorts of foods. And that's often why we call foods sometimes, those comfort foods, because that serotonin that's created promotes happiness and contentment and positive mood. Again, it impacts metabolism, but also gut function, because 95% of the serotonin that's made is actually produced in the gut. And so it is impacted by the microbiome. It is impacted by our diet. Even sunlight helps to create serotonin. Just getting outdoors can boost your natural levels of serotonin. And part of that is through vitamin D. Vitamin D is actually needed to convert tryptophan to serotonin. So without adequate sunlight, you could really be impacting your serotonin levels as well. Okay, not to mention the inflammatory sort of path I mentioned earlier, where tryptophan cannot be made to serotonin and melatonin with that increased inflammation. Okay, and then GABA, that's our major inhibitory neurotransmitter. You can think about it as being the brake on the system, but it promotes calm and relaxation. And so low GABA can cause tense muscles, anxiety, racing thoughts. A lot of the same things low serotonin can cause as well. But in terms of the circadian regulation, the majority of those suprachiasmatic nucleus neurons, right, produce GABA. And so they're finding that lighting can actually cause an imbalance in GABA if you get light during the wrong times of the day, opposite your circadian rhythm. Okay. And this leads to those circadian rhythm, what I call mismatches, where something, our experiences, our situations, our circumstances aren't matched up with what our biology is trying to do, right? Okay, so it creates those mismatches in terms of what society, what our job, what our family might expect of us, and in terms of those roles, those behaviors that we have. So these disrupted rhythms can greatly, again, impact that sleep, metabolism, all those things we've talked about this series. Okay, so the things that we want to address include sleep hygiene, and then that lighting, the timing of eating and exercise, temperature, and those stress levels. So if we look at sleep hygiene, this really refers to good sleeping habits. And I'm going to send you out a sheet that goes over this in more detail, so it can give you some tips for a good night's sleep in terms of what good sleep habits are. But it does involve setting a bedtime routine, and in particular, going to bed at the same time every night, getting up at the same time every morning. And that does include weekends. That's actually a critical step. And a lot of us get thrown off because we think, oh, well, I didn't sleep all week, I'll just make it up on the weekends. But what we don't realize is that that cycle that's constantly changing our sleep and wake times is further disrupting our circadian rhythms. Okay, but dimming lights, minimizing bright light exposure after sunset, sleeping in a cool bedroom, dark room, right? You may want to consider taking a relaxing bath or a hot shower, or maybe even drinking an herbal tea as part of your bedtime routine. I have this whole routine that I set up nightly, and I get very irritated when I am not able to go through with my routine. because I find that I don't sleep as well. So my routine is actually has been very beneficial to helping me get my circadian rhythm back on track. And we'll also, I'm hoping to have time to practice, but we may not. But there are some relaxation techniques that are really helpful for this. And they can include things like tapping, but also other non-sleep deep rest exercises. So things like yoga nidra or some sort of self-hypnosis meditation can be useful in inducing that sleep, calming that mind, relaxing the muscles, lowering stress so that we can then get sleep. So when we talk about light exposure and temperature, again, that SCN really is light sensitive, and there are other parts of the brain that listen for those cues about feeding and exercise and even social cues, you know. But like I've talked about, that sunlight is really critical because it helps to set that circadian rhythm. And so if you can get out in the sunlight, especially in the morning for 10 to 20 minutes, you are going to be doing your circadian rhythm a huge, huge service because it's going to help to start to entrain that rhythm. And this actually goes hand in hand with kind of the temperature minimum. Temperature minimum is not your minimum temperature. It's actually the point in time when that minimum temperature occurs. And so that typically shows up about 90 to 120 minutes prior to waking. So if we use that as sort of our clue, okay, and this is average wake time, but if you go out and take your walk within 2 to 4 hours after waking, then you are actually going to help start to set that circadian rhythm. Going earlier and later will shift that circadian rhythm, okay? Looking at bright light at night can be very problematic. This is not just blue light, but all bright lights. So, you know, we hear a lot about the blue with our phones and our laptops and our tablets and television, right? All those electronic types of things. And a lot of people use blue blocking glasses, blue light blocking glasses. I have a pair. I love them. They work great. But at the same point in time, I also want people to realize that it's not just blue light. Other wavelengths of light can impact circadian rhythm as well. Bright blue light just happens to be the most impactful. So, you know, cutting off electronics a few hours or an hour before bed, wearing the blue light glasses, if that works for you, can be beneficial at night. Blue light glasses used during the day, actually, blue light helps to wake you up. And if you want to be alert during the day, you may not want to wear blue light glasses during the day. But it can be light's probably the most critical factor in setting the circadian rhythm. And body temperature shifts follow a natural rhythm. So you can use temperature to kind of help set that natural rhythm. Taking a hot, relaxing bath or shower in the evening before bed is actually going to increase your body temperature, but then it's going to trigger your body to start to cool itself, and your body naturally cools itself as it prepares for sleep. So taking a warm shower at night will help promote that relaxation, whereas taking a cooler shower in the morning, if that's your thing, some people like it, some people don't, can actually promote alertness. And a lot of that has to do, again, with things like dopamine and epinephrine, norepinephrine, those things. Timing of eating and exercise. Timing of eating is really getting into, our body was meant to rest when we rest. And that's all parts of our bodies. And a lot of times in modern society, we find that we eat pretty much all the time. You know, there may be a 4 or 6 hour window where we're not eating when we do actually get a little bit of sleep, but it's not the 12, 14, 16 hours of our ancestors. And so our body still needs this time to process, to repair, to restore, to regenerate, right? And so looking at ways to impact circadian rhythm, one way would be to consider time restricted eating patterns. And this is actually, there's several ways to do this, but essentially it boils down to having an eating period of between 8 to 12 hours, which would mean that you would fast between 12 and 16 hours. If you're looking for foods that support that circadian rhythm, they really parallel a lot of those anti-inflammatory eating patterns that we've talked about. And so they include things like foods, healthy fats, right, from oils, nuts, healthy proteins, not from animal or plant sources, but then also healthy carbs in the forms of fruits and vegetables. And I'll send you out a shopping list for balancing your circadian rhythm too, if you're interested in, the foods that you would want a grocery list for. Exercise can impact your circadian rhythm. Morning aerobic activity is great because it gets your body going. It says, hey, let's raise that body temperature, let's get going. Keeping movement throughout the day, gentle movements, going for a walk after lunch can be great at getting that extra sunlight, but also from keeping you from being so sedentary and getting sort of that mid-afternoon slump, right? Late afternoon is actually when your muscles are more primed. And so that's a great time to do weight training if that's your thing. Whereas post-dinner, your body's really trying to settle. And so it can impair sleep if you do a vigorous workout after dinner. But again, keeping in mind, any exercise is better than no exercise, but just know that if you do it late, it might impact that circadian rhythm. So here are the strategies, right? This kind of just sums a lot of it up. You want to get that early morning light. Typically 10 to 20 minutes, if you can get outside, take a walk, you get movement and sunlight. You really want to have that sun coming in. It's called like a low solar angle. So it's not directly overhead, but it's got that angle coming in. And if you can do that again in the evening, when the sun is setting, again at that low solar angle, it cues the body, oh, okay, I woke up this morning. This is my cue that I now need to start to settle. And so kind of flanking your day with getting outside to see the rise and set of the sun can be beneficial. Getting outside in nature, getting about an hour of sunlight a day. Sunlight is important for balancing these neurotransmitters and regulating that circadian rhythm. Again, diet and eating patterns. Can you address any hormonal issues? Can you address any food sensitivities? Are there certain eating patterns that work better for you? Can you try the fasting, after dinner until you eat breakfast? Things like that. But then setting that bedtime routine using low or dim lights can be very beneficial after the sun sets. So this can mean instead of using an overhead light in the evening, maybe you use a desk or table lamp that is maybe a lower wattage so that it is less. Or maybe you want to try red light in the evening if you have some tasks to get done, or if you have to have overhead bright lights, trying something like those blue blockers or glasses that can block some of that bright light. And then spending time with family and friends, again, that's just to help lower that stress response. It helps us feel connected and more relaxed and at peace. Okay, so here's a couple of additional strategies and tips. We've talked about a lot of these already, but some extra things. Maybe try Epsom salt in your bath. You could even add essential oils to that, such as lavender, chamomile, or ylang ylang. Those are great for trying to induce sleep. Calming techniques, that tapping, that yoga nidra, even breathing patterns like 4-7-8, which is very popular. You can find videos of that on YouTube. Or even placing your legs up the wall or in a chair can actually help to kind of lower blood pressure, and your blood pressure naturally dips when you're getting ready for bed. So it kind of preps the body for sleep as well. Those are just some kind of hacks you can try. Um, but then you can also try teas and supplements. And so just very quickly, I'll show you these. We won't go into too much detail, but know that a lot of these actually hit on those hormones and neurotransmitters that we've talked about. So again, melatonin can be great if you have circadian disruption, but not so good for some other sleep disorders. So if it's related to circadian rhythm, it's great, but some of the other sleep issues, it may not work as well for. Magnesium is fabulous. I love it. But it does help calm the nervous system, relax the body. It can reduce pain if that's what was helping, keeping you from sleeping. And it can increase that slow wave, deeper sleep, right? And theanine is also a good natural sleep aid, right? It can help calm a racing mind and help to induce that calm sensation. Curcumin, hops, these are all options as well. They work to lessen inflammation, balance hormones, balance those neurotransmitters. But then you could also try teas as well. Things like Tulsi or ashwagandha. Those are great adaptogens. You can find them in a lot of sleep teas, and they hit on a lot of those neurotransmitters and hormones. Other ones that work in similar fashion are chamomile, lemon balm, which increases GABA, and then valerian, which again increases that slow wave deep sleep. But again, with any of those, check with your pharmacist or your doctor, because some of those, especially the herbal type teas, can have contraindications with medications. So I think that's really all I wanted to show you. I will not go into, I was hoping we would have time to do this, but I want to make sure that you have time for question and answer. So what I can do is send this is a short yoga nidra, but I will send it out to you so you can have the link. And I'll also send you the other worksheets and things that I promised you. But you can do yoga nidra searches on YouTube, lots of them there. So that is all for me. There we go. Okay. Yes, I did mention that, and I meant to go back, and we started running out of time. So the question was, can I explain more on how melatonin can impact metabolism? So what they have found, what appears to happen is that melatonin can actually suppress the pancreas. And we know that the pancreas is responsible for secreting insulin, secreting digestive enzymes. It does a lot of things, right? But specifically with insulin, when the melatonin is elevated, right? It's telling your body it's time to sleep. It looks like it's suppressing pancreatic function. So if you were to eat later in the night, for instance, then you would actually be sending your body mixed signals, because your melatonin is going to be telling the pancreas it's time to shut down, time to sleep, take a break. And then you've eaten something that's giving your pancreas the signal of, hey, release that insulin. We've got food to digest. And so you can actually end up with those kind of like one of those mismatches that I was mentioning. And so in that way, you may have blood sugar that goes up. You may have food that's not being processed, that's then really sitting there getting stored as extra calories kind of things. So that's what I meant by that, is it can actually tell the body that, hey, we're not supposed to be doing metabolism right now. And then that can really be problematic if you've put food in your stomach at that time. So yes, I'm assuming that this, so that's why coffee makes me happy is related to the dopamine. I'm assuming that that's what that is. Yes. Coffee makes me happy too. I have it right here. Okay. So did anyone else have any other questions?
Well, thank you, Amber. Thanks for being with us for this entire academic year. You've really put a lot into this, and we really appreciate it. We do have a Healthy UNCG YouTube channel that can be found on our website. It's just on the right hand side, and all of the presentations and workshops that Amber has done for us can be found there. Even some of the ones from the series that you did, actually, I think the whole series that you did last year is still there as well. So feel free to go back and reference those anytime you need. And then if you need any of the resources that Amber has sent out that maybe you missed, let me know, email us, and we could definitely make sure that you get those. The other thing that I'll mention just briefly is that we will be sending sort of a feedback evaluation program evaluation survey. And so we'll send that out to anyone who has been in any of the sessions. And so we would appreciate you taking 5 or 10 minutes to just fill that out so that we can plan with Amber for what you might like to see in the upcoming year. And then, of course, we'll give you all of Amber's contact information so you can reach her throughout the summer. But I thank everybody here for their time. And Amber, I especially thank you for your time and expertise. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to ask. But I just wanted to mention that before everybody had to hop off.
And Steph, I just went back. I was reading some of the comments and stuff, and I saw yours about how you stay up later to. That's actually, that has a name. It's called sleep procrastination. And a lot of us do it because we want that time. We crave that time for ourselves.
Yeah.
But
Just
yeah.
one more thing for me to procrastinate on. I tell you, like, but it's true. I think a lot of us fall into that category because, sometimes it's the only time of day that it's quiet, or maybe that you don't have something, dinging at you or pulling at you. And so it's sort of definitely a double-edged sword on that one.
For sure. For sure.
Many thanks to all of you too. It was great to see all of you and see your names, and we hope to see you again soon. All right. I think that's everyone. Well, thank you again.